Hello everyone and welcome back. It's been a very long time since my last video and I'm sure you're used to hearing that bullshit from me, but that happens to be the truth as well. I did say, I believe, in my last video that I might make more content on a casual basis, so here I am making some content. I hope you all enjoy it. I've been feeling pretty inspired for this video. I have been busy with work and whatnot and some family matters, but I also had this urge all of a sudden again to make a video and talk about something I'm passionate about. And movies are a passion of mine. And there's a franchise that I want to talk about today that's quite frankly one of my favorite action film, adventure film franchises of all time, and that is the James Bond movies. The reason why I decided to talk about these now is because a big development has happened. Of course, the Amazon situation. Amazon now, they're going to be now distributing James Bond films. What can you say? But it's mixed feelings on it. There's three camps of people who and how they feel about this situation with Amazon. There's people who don't like the situation, there's people who have mixed feelings, and there's people who are for it. But it seems to lean into the former two categories. There's people who hate the idea or are very mixed on it. I fall into the middle category of being mixed on it. On one hand, we may be getting more consistent Bond releases, and we might get Henry Cavill as James Bond after all. Jeff Bezos asked, who would you like to see as James Bond? And everybody virtually agreed that Henry Cavill should be Bond, and I can see why people want Cavill for Bond. He just has the look. He looks like, in a way, a combination of Sean Connery and Timothy Dalton. He's got the physical shape of Connery, but more muscular, whereas some of those strong, sharp features that Dalton had. So I can see why people would be wanting Henry Cavill to do it. And of course, that audition tape from back in the early 2000s leaked out. And I think Cavill, well, this was when he was very young. I'm sure he was changed since then. Of course, actors mature and develop. But judging from that audition, he seemed okay. I think Rupert Friend actually did a little better, to be honest, at least at that time. But he looked baby-faced. He looked way too young. But I think Cavill now would be perfect for it. But you could see the potential in Cavill in that audition tape from back in the day. So it's an interesting time. I'm curious to see what happens. But, I hope Amazon know what they have. They should treat every Bond thing as an event. Now, is there any spin-offs I would like to see personally? Not really, no. I don't think so. I think that would cheapen the mystique of James Bond. But what I would like to see is more regular releases of Bond and plans for Bond, because that might be actually a good thing. But on the other hand, there's always been this sort of excitement on how Eon would reinvent Bond. When you watch the Eon Bond films, there is this sense of like the series evolving, changing with the time, and how they would adapt each actor to the role, and how this Bond should be for this era, if that makes sense. So Connery represents the 60s and early 70s. Roger Moore represents the mid-70s up until the mid-80s. Dalton represents the late 80s, almost early 90s. He would have done another one in 91, 92 if those legal issues hadn't happened. That's another discussion. Brosnan represented the late 90s up until the early 2000s, and Craig represented the 2000s onwards. So they always had to kind of reinvent Bond for that time the actor stepped into the role in some way or another. So it's always been interesting. So I'm keen to see what happens. But on the other note now, I want to talk a little bit about my history with Bond. And then in another video, I'm going to go through all the films and just give 5-minute reviews. Maybe a little more, we'll see what happens. But I'm going to try and aim to make a video where I talk about each film for 5 minutes and summarize my quick thoughts on each film, give it a little review, what I like, what I don't like, and yeah, do something like that, and maybe do another video talking about how each actor fares in the role, But I'll talk about my history with Bond and how I got into the Bond fandom, the Bond, world, so to speak. Okay, so this is how I got into the James Bond franchise. From my memory, I'm going to try and go from the top of my memory. This isn't scripted. It started when I was about 7 years old. I remember distinctively if my memory serves me correct, it was 1997, around that time. I was at my cousin's place, and I remember we were playing in the living room. We were just playing with action figures. We had the TV on in the background. My dad and my uncle were behind us just chatting. And in the background, GoldenEye started, and we just thought, oh, what's this movie? It looked cool, you know, with the gun barrel and everything. And it was like, oh, this is, my cousin's like, oh, this is James Bond, because he was slightly older than me. He was like 2 or 3 years older than me. And Pierce Brosnan was the Bond of the time. He was the Bond of my era growing up. And we were watching GoldenEye, the opening scene, you know, where he's in the facility and everything, and we watched it as far as the sequence with Xenia Onatop. So the minute Xenia Onatop shows up in this movie, that sequence with the Admiral, the minute that scene came up, my dad's like, changes the channel. He immediately saw that come up. He's like, oh no, click. And he stopped it right there, and we were like, ah, typical, right? We wanted to watch the whole movie, even though it may not have been right for us. But anyways, make a long story short, that was my first introduction to Bond, the character, and that kind of intrigued me. I was like, oh, I want to see more of the Bond films, you know, and oddly enough, not long after, probably around the same time, really, I saw another Bond film, a little bit of it, not all of it, and it was with my grandfather this time. It was I think it was on a weekend, because I remember it was during the day, in the middle of the day. And we were just flipping through TV channels, and Never Say Never Again was playing. And I only know that now because back then I had no idea what it was. I just knew that it was James Bond. My grandfather was like, oh, that's James Bond, the original James Bond, Sean Connery. I'm like, oh, okay, so there was another James Bond? He goes, yes, there's been 4 or 5 different actors, you know? And I'm like, oh, wow. So this is like, it was getting me more and more curious. And the scene that I remembered seeing was where Bond is fighting that guy in the gymnasium. And I just thought it was cool. I don't know. And he throws acid in the guy's face. You know, I'm only 7 years old. I mean, any kind of action movie will impress me. But I was curious. I'm like, more James Bond? I'm like, okay, this guy's pretty popular, it seems like. So following that, not long after, I think it was actually within the next year, so I was like 8 years old, I remember going to the video store with my dad, and I said, Dad, I want to watch some of the James Bond movies. And he looked at me and he said, okay, well, we can watch some of them, because some of them I want to see before you watch them. Because my dad had seen the James Bond films. He was a Roger Moore fan. He knew Connery's films. And, you know, as the movies went along more recently, they did get a bit more violent, a bit more sleazier, especially Pierce Brosnan's ones. Surprisingly, it's amazing when you go back to the Brosnan era. It's like Dalton went in a violent direction, Brosnan went in a sexual direction. It's kind of interesting, like how the two eras of Dalton and Brosnan differed. In fact, it's quite interesting. But anyways, my dad used to do this a lot. Whenever I wanted to see a movie that was, let's say, over a PG, he would never allow me to watch an R-rated film, because in Australia the rating system is different from the United States. So the PG-13 equivalent in Australia is M, or M15 plus as it was. My dad would let me watch the PG Bond films, but the more recent ones that Dalton and Brosnan did, he would have to review them, and if I was to watch them, he would have to fast forward the scenes he found objectionable, right? And I couldn't watch those on my own accord. So that's the way my dad kind of arranged things. He says, it was kind of weird sometimes, because my dad would let me watch like Rambo with no problem. There's a lot of carnage in that, but, you know, it was very fantastical. And Bond was fantastical too. But, you know, Rambo 2 was one of my favorite movies growing up, and having an older brother helped because he used to watch them too. But anyways, my dad was really concerned more about sex mixed with violence, and really graphic violence like blood and gore. I mean, Rambo didn't really have any blood and gore. There's a lot of shooting, but same with Bond, really. But anyways, we went to the video store and I was looking through all the Bond films. I was actually looking for Never Say Never Again, and I didn't know the title of the movie though, because I didn't finish watching Never Say Never Again with my grandfather. We kind of just stopped it because we had to go out and visit somebody. So I didn't get to find out the title. They didn't have it listed. Normally they'd put the subtitle of what the movie and the show is back in those days, but it would fade away after the first commercial. So I was catching it right in the middle of the action, so to speak. But we had to leave and I didn't get to finish it. I got up to the part where Bond throws the acid and it turns out to be a urine sample, which is funny now when I look at it. I didn't know what it was at the time. So anyways, I was looking for that one in the video store, but I didn't know the title. So I asked the lady, oh, what's the one where Bond throws acid in the guy's face? She goes, I'm not sure. I can't. She didn't know. It was a crapshoot. I said, okay, I'm going to pick that one. And that one was You Only Live Twice. And I actually picked it because Connery was in it, so I was guessing maybe it's that one. 2, I liked the title. And believe it or not, after I watched it, that became my favorite Bond film of all time. To this day, You Only Live Twice is still my favorite James Bond film. It's a combination of two things, nostalgia, and I just think it's a perfect gateway Bond film, in a sense. I think it's just got... There's some things about it that haven't aged well, obviously. The moment where he disguises himself as a Japanese fisherman, that was ridiculous. If I can take that away, the film is still really enjoyable. You know, it has all the fantasy trappings of Bond. It has the adventure, it has the villains, the gadgets, you name it. It's perfect. To me, it's a perfect fantasy spy film, you know. And I loved it, and I still love it to this day, despite some flaws with it, of course. But since then, I became a Bond fan, and I started exploring the whole library of Bond films. So that is my introduction to Bond, and over the years, I've seen them all in the cinemas. The first Bond film, I haven't seen all of them, but all the ones from when I was young, I pretty much saw in the cinemas, with the exception of Tomorrow Never Dies. So I saw World Is Not Enough. That was the first Bond film I saw in cinemas in 1999. Went and saw that with my dad. I watched Die Another Day, of course, which is terrible. I liked it back when I saw it, but I absolutely despise it now. Has a good first 20 minutes, but that's about it. Casino Royale was, for me, the best experience I ever had in a cinema watching Bond. I thought, wow, Daniel Craig is the business. This guy has brought it back. He's the best since Connery and the best since, since Connery, I thought. But, yeah, I mean, Craig's films really, I thought, were awesome, with the exception of a few of them. But now it's come to this. Amazon now is going to be doing the Bond films, and it's a strange time. It's a really strange time, and I don't know what to make of it all. But Bond is something that, I don't know, I mean, where can it go? I was hoping, actually, that they would do... I was hearing musings that Aaron Taylor-Johnson was going to play Bond, and there's a lot of people who say the guy can't act, blah, blah, blah. He wouldn't make a good Bond. I don't know about that. We said that a lot of time. People were saying that about Daniel Craig. For those of you who remember, or if you don't remember, try to imagine. You got to go back to before Craig became Bond. There was a website called craigisnotbond.com. There were people calling him James Blonde. They said he looked like, a boxer or something. They tried to really squash the guy. They say he wasn't handsome enough. He was too short. And, on paper, okay, maybe he isn't the classic definition of what Bond looks like. Not tall, dark, and handsome. He looks, brutish in a sense. But having said that, he done a good job. So I was able to go, okay, he doesn't look like Bond, but he plays it so well. So I was able to look past that for a moment, because the quality of the films and his performance, at least in those first 3 Bond films, was really good. He wasn't so great in Spectre. He looked bored. No Time to Die, he looked a little better. To me, it's like his performance was about as good as Connery's in You Only Live Twice in No Time to Die. But it was better than Spectre, where he looked like he was bored, kind of like Connery in Diamonds Are Forever. So it was kind of like, that's the tone. But I think Craig's I would say 2 out of the Craig tenure, his best. That's Casino Royale and Skyfall. No Time to Die is a mixed bag. Spectre is bland. And Quantum of Solace is just, yikes, that was awful. But yeah, again, I'm going into something I should probably save for the Bond reviews, and I'm not going to talk any more about it, but that's my history with the James Bond films so far. And the next video I'll do is a review series of all the Bond films. I'm going to try and do each Bond in 5 minutes, each Bond film, talk about it, review it, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and we'll see how that goes. So stay tuned for that one. Until then, see you all later.